Alright, in this video I want to talk about trusting your senses as it pertains to using science, right? Mainly I'm going to focus on sight because science involves you being able to trust your sense of sight so that you can observe your experiments and repeat those same experiments in the same way and have others do it the same way you've done it and get the same results, right? Science right there, experimentation. And you need to be able to see what you're doing for your experiment to be able to tell somebody else to do the same thing, right? So not only do you have to trust your senses, you have to trust that other people can trust their senses, right? But today, especially among atheists, they want you to not trust your senses because they're trying to tell you that your senses can't be trusted, right? But basically what they're actually telling you is you can't trust your senses, but you can trust our senses. So trust our senses. We'll tell you what's what. And it's basically just a sly, subtle trick to get you not to think for yourselves and allow them to think for you. Is basically what they're doing, is to get you to stop thinking for yourself, especially critically, and to just let them do the thinking and tell you what is what. That's basically what they're doing. Because how can they find out anything to be true if they can't trust their senses? They can't, right? But what they're trying to do actually is to get you to think that way, that you can't trust your senses, so you can't actually establish anything to be true, but they can trust theirs, so they can establish what's true, therefore they get to dictate to you what is true and what's not. And it's just, like I said, a sly, subtle little trick, little Jedi mind trick to try to flip things and manipulate, because these people obviously don't care about truth, and they obviously don't care about what is right and what is wrong. They have no moral compass, and they show it by playing these little games. And the reason why I'm talking about this is actually talking to an atheist. And like atheist games, this guy comments on a video I have about atheism, and his first comment talks about how some atheists refer to themselves as agnostic atheists because they're not really sure, but they choose to believe that there's no God, and then equates believing in God as believing, or not believing in God as not believing in sock stealing pixies, right? So, if he walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? But this guy's like, I'm not an atheist. Or, I never claimed to be an atheist. It's like, well, you never claimed not to be, but you're acting like one and talking like one, so it's safe to assume you are one. And never confirmed or denied, right? So, if I'm saying you're an atheist and you don't say you're not, then you are, right? Until you actually say otherwise, that's how it's going to be. It's like talking to a police officer, right? If you do not verify the opposite of what he's saying, he's going to go with what he's saying. So if he says, oh, you stole the car, and you don't confirm or deny, he's going to assume you just don't want to say it, and boom, there you go. You got yourself in trouble. But anyway, let's get into this here. We're talking about things like illusions that tie into things like mirages and hallucinations. Now, these are things that are considered illusions because if you stare at these things, I don't know how it works. If I'm screen recording, I'm assuming you're getting the same weird effect when you're watching this. But if you look at the center of these things or off to the side of them, they look like they're moving, right? But they're not. It's a little trick, right? But the thing is, you can trust your senses because you are seeing something, right? It's just you're interpreting it a little off. You're interpreting wrong. And there's different ways you can show that this is not moving at all. It's just a trick, right? It's much like magic tricks. That they make it look like they're sawing somebody in half or whatever other trick they're doing. You are seeing something, but you're being tricked and you're interpreting what you're seeing to be wrong. But that doesn't mean you can't trust your senses. It just means you have to be more alert and you have to be in actual thought and critically think things through to figure out what you're seeing. You can't just go, oh, this is what it is without actually looking into it. A little bit of pun intended there. But anyway, another example is like a mirage. You see something on the road, it's a really hot day, and the heat's coming up, and it looks kind of like there's water all over the road, right? Or you see a mirage and you see what looks like buildings or something. In the desert, you think there's water and you want to go get a drink, right? You're seeing something. It's not that your eyes are lying to you. It's just what you're seeing looks like something like water, but it's actually the heat. So you're seeing something. You can trust your senses. It's just that you think it's something that it's not. Right? Like they say, a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? You're seeing something and you think it's a sheep, but it's actually a wolf dressed up as a sheep. So you're tricked here. And it's kind of the same thing here. These heat lines come up and they look like puddles of water, but it's not, right? And it's basically your interpretation. So with this guy, we're basically getting into that, and he was talking about, your eyes see things, and the protons coming through, and then you interpret what you are actually getting from those protons and whatnot, right? And it was like, okay, well, if you can't trust your eyes and what you're getting from your eyes, and you can't trust your interpretation, then you have no foundation whatsoever. You're basically like the tossing waves of the sea, the shifting sands of the desert. You have no foundation, right? You basically, if you want to actually establish something that to believe in and to call it truth, you can't, because you can't even trust anything that your senses are picking up, right? You want to say that, oh, I got this wooden table here. Well, how can you trust your senses of what you're seeing and feeling? How can you trust that? How can you know what that is? How you know you're interpreting it right? That it's not something else and you just think it's a wooden table? How can you tell, right? And who gets to decide that their senses are the ones that work and they get to decide what is and isn't truth? Which is basically what they want to do with this basically appeal to authority with somebody who has a PhD or a doctorate or wears a lab coat on the TV and says they're a scientist. And they're just as human as you are, and if you can't trust your senses, they can't trust theirs. So you can see how this gets really silly and stupid real quick. Because if you try to establish something as true, it just, like I said, the tossing waves, you get this wave going and then it's gone. And you get this mound of sand going, the winds come and you try to build something on top of that, the water or on the sand, it either sinks or it's going to collapse because the shifting sand, all of a sudden its foundation is gone and it comes crumbling down. So you can use the water and the sand and you can do these whimsical, artistic, imaginary things, but you can't actually call it true because you can't trust your senses. You have to be able to trust your senses in order to establish anything. Which leads into, well, hallucinations. People hallucinate. Well, I actually need to get into that more to really establish what this is and what's going on. You see, there's people who go to South America and they take ayahuasca, right? And they say they see these weird visions and this, what have you. But the thing is that if you can have like 2, 3, 4, 5 people all taking this ayahuasca and they all see the exact same thing. So there's a weird connected hallucination, but maybe they're seeing something that's really there. Like this lady, she might be close to dying, and there's some people who say they see a loved one, or they see some people walking around that aren't there, or you don't see, so you don't think are there. They're hallucinating, but maybe they're seeing the dead. They may be an angel, a loved one that has passed on. How do you know they're not seeing that? Right? You cannot tell. You just decide that's how it is. They're just hallucinating. That's just your decision, what you decide, but it's just something you built up on the shifting sand, and there's no way for you to establish that as true or not, because you can't trust your senses anyway. How do you know your senses aren't working and theirs are? That you're just the one that has the broken eyes. So you can't see what's real, but they can. How do you know? You can't say that. You can say, well, more people believe what I believe and see what I see. Well, you can't trust your senses, so maybe you're all just blind. Maybe the majority of people are blind, and there's a few people, just 10 people in the world, that can see a lot of the things that are really going on. That's a possibility, right? But you can't say for sure because you can't trust your senses. So it doesn't matter if you've got billions of people all agreeing with you. If you can't trust your senses, you're just an all blind people all trying to claim you can see. Who cares, right? It's ridiculous. So you can see how this is nonsensical, and this is, where the conversation starts and where it can't move forward with this fellow, because this is basically just something to deny science, because science shows us that there's a God. I get into it in more detail on the first video I've posted on this channel on YouTube. If you're watching this on Rumble or BitChute, it's not there. It's on my YouTube channel. I think I posted the same video, but it might not be the first video I posted on my Rumble or BitChute channel. But I get into the science behind the existence of God, such as life cannot come from non-life and consciousness cannot come from something that's not conscious, right? So something that has a certain level of consciousness comes from something with equal to or greater level of consciousness. And life only comes from something that's alive. That's science. That's what we can actually observe. Now, if you try to say that life came from something non-living, that's not science. That's speculation and imagination. That's not something we can actually observe. That's not something that we can experiment and prove. It's not real, right? And then ultimately we cannot have an infinite regress, right? Because you cannot travel an infinite amount of time, right? And what I mean by that, if you don't grasp the infinite regress, is that if you think time just keeps going backwards forever, well, then you can never get to this moment in time. Because let's say your home is an infinite amount of time away. Like you have to travel an infinite amount of time to get there. How long would you have to travel to get there? You never get there, right? If you're going an infinite amount of speed, how long would it take you to get there? You would never get there, right? Because it's an infinite amount of time away. You would never get there. It would be impossible for you to ever get there. You can't get home because it's an infinite amount of time away. It's an infinite distance away. And you cannot travel an infinite distance. It's impossible to travel in an infinite distance, and it's impossible to travel an infinite amount of time. So there has to be a beginning in order for us to actually get to where we are. So there's a source that is alive and conscious. Just that alone, that little piece here, I get into more detail and other things in the video, but that just little piece right there, the atheists like to ignore it. They like to just sidetrack and mock and scoff. They can't disprove it. They can't prove otherwise. They don't like that. So they come up with stuff like this about you can't trust your senses because they don't want to trust the science, right? Or they at least don't want you to trust your senses, but they want you to trust theirs. and what they think and everything, because they want to put themselves basically as the authority of what is true and get to dictate reality as if they're God. And that seems to be the problem, is their ego. They hate God, they want to be God, so they act like God and basically try to say what is what, because they don't care about what's true, they don't care about what's right or wrong. They can say it all the day long. Oh, I care about what's true. I care about the science. Morality is important. We got to do the right thing. Yeah, they can say that, so they don't actually do it. That's something completely different. I mean, even as Christians, we got trouble doing the right thing and following the truth because we battle our flesh. So, how much worse is it for somebody who doesn't even have God? They don't even have Jesus in their life. So, it explains why you get things like this from them. It's basically just a way to deny science, deny the evidence, and then to also get you to doubt yourself and your own thoughts and your own critical thinking, and to basically blindly put your trust and faith into them and the so-called authorities of science because they have a doctorate, a PhD, they're a professor, and they wear a lab coat. So you just trust them, even though they're just as human as you are. And if you can't trust your senses, they can't trust theirs. It's as simple as that. And if nobody can trust their senses, then we can't trust science, because it has to do with us observing the experiment. And if we can't trust that, we just make up whatever we want. It doesn't matter. We're just going through some crazy drug trip delusion as we go through life, and that's that. And we don't know what is what. We just can make up anything. And if we do that, we get all kinds of chaos and confusion. It is just ridiculous nonsense. There's no such thing as right or wrong. There's no such thing as truth. No such thing as actual reality. You might as well just be somebody that is just, their mind is screwed up from just drug addiction. That's where you might as well be. This is basically doing the same thing to your mind that somebody on drugs is on, because when they're on drugs, they're all confused, their senses are all messed up about the things they're seeing and hearing and feeling, and they can't tell what is what, and they basically want you to have that same mindset without being on drugs. Is basically what it is. Um, but yeah, I think I got the point across. I think it came across clear here. If there's anything else that comes to me, I'll put it in the info box or another video, or if things come up in the conversation, I'll add that stuff to it. But with this as the foundation, if you can't trust your senses, you can't go on to anything. You can't build, and there's no point to. Like, let's say this fella convinces me I can't trust my senses. Well, then how do I know that he's even real? That he's not just a figment of my imagination? That I'm just making something up for conversation, for entertainment, or to keep me from going completely insane or something, right? How can I know anything? I'll just might as well go wander and do whatever I want, like somebody whose mind has been screwed up by drugs, right? So, yeah, we either trust our senses and then we have a foundation that we can build upon and use science, and then we can go on and discover what is actually true, or there's nothing. There's no point. So anyway, thanks for watching and take care.